Okay, you know why you're here. You want to read together with me Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. So let's start without further ado. Here's the foreword from Finlay. The Phenomenology of Spirit, first published 1807, is a work seen by Hegel as a necessary forepiece to his philosophical system. This is already an interesting interpretation in my mind. Of course, Hegel holds that position. But yeah, what is the philosophical system, right? As later set forth in the Encyclopedia of Philosophical Sciences in outline of 1817, 1827, and 1830. But it is meant to be a forepiece that can be dropped and discarded once the student, through deep immersion in its contents, has advanced through confusions and misunderstanding to the properly philosophical point of view. Its task is to run through, in a scientifically purged order, the stages in the mind's necessary progress from immediate sense consciousness to the position of a scientific philosophy, showing thereby that this position is the only one that the mind can take when it comes to the end of the intellectual and spiritual adventures described in the book. So I actually have a very different view on this book. So I really suggest if you use the translation of Miller with the foreword of Finlay. I mean, you may read this, but I think it points you in a certain direction of interpretation, and you may stay open for other possible interpretations. And of course, one of these other interpretations will be delivered by me. So let's start with a preface on scientific cognition. It is customary to preface a work with an explanation of the author's aim, why he wrote the book, and the relationship in which he believes it to stand to the earlier contemporary treatises on the same subject. So what Hegel actually says here is that when we write a book, we usually put a preface in there and we say what is the relationship to other works that were already written. And he has a little bit of a different position on that, which is a little bit hard to carve out, but we try. In the case of a philosophical work, however, such an explanation seems not only superfluous, but in view of the nature of the subject matter, even inappropriate and misleading. So when we do philosophy, that seems to be not a good thing to do. It's superfluous, and misleading. That's maybe also when you read the foreword of Finlay, right? Because you have to let the content speak for itself. I guess you don't even need my interpretation, but I mean, admittingly, Hegel is hard to read. Although the foreword is not so difficult. For whatever might appropriately be said about philosophy in a preface, say a historical statement of the main drift and the point of view, the general content and results, a string of random assertions and assurances about truth, none of this can be accepted as the way in which to expound philosophical truth. So, okay, I think what he says here is that the general problem is that philosophy tries to present and unfold truth. But when you just give a preface, you're not unfolding it. You're just assuring people that it is the truth, but you're not really doing philosophy. So let's go on. Also, since philosophy moves essentially in the element of universality, so what is universality? Philosophy moves in the element of universality. So universal statements are not statements about a general case, like for example, Socrates is mortal. It's a statement about a particular person, but we rather say something like all men are mortal. The universe is infinite. Maybe something like God is great. All gods must be great. So I guess universal statements are always tied, at least in analytic philosophy, to a statement that includes all individuals of a particular species. Or maybe I make some mistakes here in mincing my words. But I hope it's somehow clear what universality is. So it moves in the element of universality. Now we have an explanation, which includes within itself the particular. So what's the universal, what's the particular, and what is the individual? That's always the question, right? So the individual is a specific instance of a species. Let's say we have the species of lions, and somehow the characteristics of lions apply to all the individuals. And then we have the individual, which is this particular individual, the matter that embodies the universal characteristics of the lion. Now, I never really know what is the particular, in German, das Besondere. Yeah. So that which makes it special in comparison to other species, I guess. What is it in the species of a lion that makes it a lion? Because we can give a definition, right? So we use the next proximate genus, which would be a cat-like creature, and we say a lion is a cat with a mane. That may not be the best definition, of course, but it maybe helps us to understand. So that which makes it special, a specific difference, is the mane. And it distinguishes it, according to the definition of a definition, from all other individuals of another species. So I guess this is das Besondere, or the particular, but I'm not entirely clear about these distinctions. I'm thinking about that for a very long time, and maybe I should investigate a little bit more into that. Why don't we ask ChatGPT? Let me ask ChatGPT. Okay, here we go. We get immediately some education in philosophical terms. And it is actually what I said. I'm thinking about that for a very long time. I never looked it up. So let's dive into it. So universality refers to the quality of being applicable, present, or true for all instances or members of a certain category or class. All individual lions are lions. All individual trees are trees, right? They are not cans or parts. That's what's universal about a tree, although every individual tree is different from the other trees, right? It deals with general characteristics or properties that are shared by multiple individuals or particulars. Universals are abstract concepts or qualities that exist independently of specific instances. For example, the concept of humanity is a universal because it encompasses all humans. So let's jump to particularity. Particularity is the quality of being specific, unique, or distinct from others. It pertains to individual instances or entities that have unique characteristic qualities or properties that distinguish them from others. So that's a bit what I said. So when one species is differentiated from another one, it has to have something that is particular, right? Particulars are concrete and specific entities or objects in the world. Yeah, that's also what I would like to say. I mean, I'm more interested in particulars than universals, right? But in order to describe particulars, we need universal characteristics. For example, a specific person, a particular apple, or a particular city are all examples of particulars. Yeah, but what's the difference from an individual here? That's what I would like to know. Particularity is often contrasted with universality because it emphasizes the uniqueness or distinctiveness of individual entities. Individuality is closely related to particularity, but can be seen as a more specific aspect of it. It refers to the unique identity or distinctiveness of a specific individual or entity. While particularity emphasizes being distinct from others, individuality emphasizes the unique characteristic experiences and qualities that make a specific entity or individual who they are. Individuality is often associated with personal identity. Yeah, it's still not entirely clear to me here, because I grasp particularity as something like more the instance of substance. This what makes this, which would be false to be considered just matter, as already Aristotle showed. Because if we just considered it to be matter, we would wonder, well, how does form attach? Then we can say, according to Aristotle, well, maybe substance, that what the thing really is, what makes this substance, is the compound of matter and form. But there are also problems with regard to that, because then if it's a compound of matter and form, what then is it? Well, maybe we call it a particular. Anyway, so you see, like, these terms are generally hard to define. Let's see, maybe we find here something. Individuality is a specific aspect of particularity, highlighting the unique, distinct qualities. Yeah, well, I'm not really happy. I'm not really happy with these definitions yet. But yeah, I would say particular is that thing which we really find in the world, and then we try to understand it. But how, if we don't use universal terms? How do we understand the individual tree if we don't describe it as a tree? And treeness somehow does not just apply to this individual tree, but to all trees. Same for human beings. We all recognize each other as humans, usually. I mean, some people have a queer mind. Queer, I don't know if that is the right word, kind of, let's say, perverted mind. And they don't see other humans as humans, but as objects. But generally, when we look as a human, we say, oh, that's a human, and that's a characteristic that he shares with all other people. Now, but if we describe this human in terms of his universality, then what is that individual human? So what is it that makes him this human? And I want to say here, this particular human, not just the individual, which may be a heap of particles, but which combines them to make him this particular thing, which bears the universal characteristics that we usually to describe him. Anyway, so this is what we are talking here about. So philosophy moves essentially in the element of universality, and I think it's because it's related to language, which includes within itself the particular. It might seem that here more than in any of the other sciences, the subject matter itself, and even in its complete nature, were expressed in the aim and the final results, the execution being, by contrast, really the unessential factor. Okay, this is a bit hard to understand for me. I have to think a little bit about it. I mean, let's look at the next text to understand this better. On the other hand, in the ordinary view of anatomy, so anatomy is the structure of our muscles, I guess, and maybe our bones. For instance, say the knowledge of the parts of the body regarded as inanimate. So we don't look at the body as a whole, but we look just as at particular instances of the body, right? And this is where we, I guess, just look at the particulars. We are quite sure that we do not as yet possess the subject matter itself, the content of the science, but must in addition exert ourselves to know the particulars. We really, we cannot look at our body from the outside and say, oh, that's anatomy as a whole, right? We have to dissect it, take it apart and look what it really is. I guess that's what he's saying here. And then further, in the case of such an aggregate of information which has no right to bear the name of science, an opening talk about aim and other such generalities is usually conducted in the same historical and uncomprehending way in which the content itself, the nerves, muscles, etc., is spoken of. So I guess, we just get aggregates of information, so we get bits and pieces about what muscle is there and what is there. But he says this has not the right to call itself science. So and then he says an opening talk, I guess he talks now about the foreword again, about aim and other such generalities is usually conducted in the same historical and uncomprehending way in which the content itself, the nerves, muscles, etc., is spoken of. An opening talk. So I guess when we talk about the content in anatomy and even have a foreword and say what is the aim, namely knowing the particulars, we never talk about what they really are, because nerves have a function in a human body, and without this relationship to the whole, they're essentially meaningless. I guess that's what he says. I mean, we can understand them as particulars, surely, right? But as a science, we have to say what is their overall purpose, and we have to extend it. And I think this is what he wants to say with regard to philosophy, that philosophy is a study of the whole that actually tries to understand the parts in relationship to the whole. So we can say here, the particulars, which makes them themselves in relationship to a universal aim, goal, or something like this. So therefore, let's read the sentence before again, because maybe it's now clearer. So philosophy moves essentially in the element of universality, which includes within itself the particular. It might seem that here more than in any of the other sciences, the subject matter itself, and even in its complete nature, were expressed in the aim and the final results, the execution being, by contrast, really the unessential factor. So now, okay, what position do we have here? It seems that philosophy is related to the whole, and then the execution is not so important. But he says here, it might seem. Yeah. He's not saying that. I think he says that both parts are important, the execution and the relationship to the whole, while anatomy just focuses on the particular and cannot be adequately called science in that regard. So in the case of philosophy, on the other hand, this would give rise to the incongruity that along with the employment of such method, its inability to grasp the truth would also be demonstrated. In the case of philosophy, on the other hand, this would give rise to the incongruity that along with the employment of such method, its inability to grasp the truth would also be demonstrated. So what would happen if we started with a foreword where we just explain our goals as the content itself, and we explained these goals of the whole as if they were particulars, I guess? Well, we wouldn't work through the content. I think that's the overall goal of this first paragraph. Philosophy requires a view of the whole and the work on the particulars. And very often you see people talking about philosophy and just talking about general goals, general aims. Maybe this is a little bit also true for this reading here. But this is not what Hegel recommends. So we really have to work through the particulars in relationship to the whole. And I think that's how he understands philosophy, and therefore a foreword would be, in a sense, superfluous and misleading. So why then does he write a foreword? Well, essentially says maybe that a foreword is not necessary. So, and in my experience, and we come here to an end, a lot of philosophy professors, they started immediately with the content, with the first chapter, and they said, we don't read the foreword. And their argument very often was something like, oh, he wrote the foreword after he had completed the Phenomenology of Spirit. But I'm not so sure. I think he really presents philosophical content in this foreword. And therefore, we will start indeed with a foreword, not with a foreword of Finlay, however. Okay, I hope this helped. Please correct me if I said things wrong. I'm sorry, I forgot to switch to this text here. It's bad, but I hope you have the text of Miller yourself and can follow along with it. Next time we read paragraph 2. Thanks for watching.